Well, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are in the world. I'm Fred Plotkin. This is Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know, Adagio is a video and audio streaming service dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to music lovers all around the world. Whether you are watching in Europe, in the United States, somewhere like New York or Kansas, South America, today is a very special day, and not just because Zoom decided that today would be the day that it wouldn't work for me, so I'm speaking to you on my phone rather than on my computer, but today is special. It's May 27th of 2022, because my guest today, and I mean this in all seriousness, is one of the people in the world that I most have wanted to converse with. We've known each other casually and professionally for many, many years, but we've never sat down for a conversation. I'll take it further. If I were to name the people in the world that I wanted to converse with, off the top of my head, I would say Jane Fonda, Dr. Anthony Fauci, Michelle Obama, Pete Townsend of The Who, the Pope, and my guest today, the great opera singer, great American, the bass, Samuel Ramey. Sam, welcome, and thank you for your patience in dealing with this technology.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
So this was not going to be my first question, but it will be now. You, as a consummate professional, have dealt with sudden last-minute glitches where the curtain doesn't rise, the scenery doesn't work, where something goes wrong. What does it feel like? I know what it just felt like for me, but what does it feel like in terms of your energy revving up to the moment of the overture starting and the curtain rising, when you suddenly have to put the brakes on everything?
Yeah, well, it can be kind of a downer. Because you build yourself up, you're ready to go, and all of a sudden they come out and say, we're going to be delayed a little bit, so then you have to sort of, everything goes down, and then you have to wind yourself up again. So, yeah. But it usually works out all right.
It does indeed. You are from Colby, Kansas. I've been to many American states. I've not yet been to Kansas. I only know that Colby is in the far western part of the state.
Yeah, it's up in the northwest corner.
Northwest corner. So it's near Colorado, Nebraska?
Yeah, it's about 40 miles from each of those states.
Okay. And I'm guessing you didn't grow up with opera?
That's very true. I did not grow up with opera. Aside from the occasional opera singer on Ed Sullivan back in the day, that was about my only exposure to growing up to opera. I mean, I always enjoyed music. My parents enjoyed music. Everybody in my family sang a little bit. So there was something. My mother always hoped I was the last child in the family, and she always hoped that somebody would pursue music in some way. So she was very happy when I decided to study music when I went off to college.
I gather at some point you heard a recording of the bass Ezio Pinza.
That's true. Yes, I went. I finished high school, and then I went to university here in Kansas State University, and I had gone a couple of summers to music camp there, so they knew me, and they gave me a little scholarship, so which helped a little bit. So anyway, I went there, and I was studying voice with a man there, and he had me working. He put me to work on Non più andrai from Nozze di Figaro, and he just suggested that I go to the library, or I somehow find a recording to listen to, and just to get an idea of the style and the language. And so I went out to a local record store, going through the bins, and came across this recording of somebody called Ezio Pinza. And I looked, and there was Non più andrai was on the recording, so I bought the recording, and that was my first real exposure to opera. And I don't know, it was something about whether it was, I'm sure it was something about his voice. He was a fantastic singer. And I just became more, what is this opera? No, so I used to go to the library, and I'd listen to recordings of various operas. And so then I just got very, very interested. And then I heard a friend of mine told me about the Central City Opera in Colorado, that they, used young singers for the chorus and said, so I went out to my local radio station and made a tape. I can't remember what I sang. I think I sang in Diesen, Heiligen Hallen and something else. Sent it off, and lo and behold, they took me. They hired me. So I went out to Central City the summer of 1963. And there I was, rehearsing, performing. I had never seen an opera until I was actually on stage taking part in one. The two operas were Don Giovanni and Il Trovatore that summer. Some very notable singers, Richard Cross and Norman Tragel were the Giovannis, Spiro Malas and Herbert Beatty were the Leporellos. Chet Ludgren was one of the DeLunas. What's her name? Oh, who's the relatively famous soprano that she covered everything at the Met?
Not Teresa Kubiak.
No, not back further. Oh, Lucina Mara. Yes.
Okay, there you go.
She was there doing Leonora and Trovatores. Anyway, so it was a very exciting summer for me. And I decided, very naively, after that time, I was looking around and I said, well, I think I'd like to do this. I think I'd like to be an opera singer. So anyway.
When I was a boy, my dad was a musician. He played trombone, and he loved opera. He played in some opera orchestras, but mostly symphonic and jazz and Broadway. But he raised me on four singers. He raised me on Victoria de Los Angeles for soprano, Marilyn Horne for mezzo, UC Bierling for tenor. He did not introduce baritone to me. I don't know why. And Ezio Pinza for the bass. And so therefore, I heard Pinza very young. He was the formative bass voice in my ear. And although, I didn't hear him live, I heard recordings, but I was taken to hear De Los Angeles and Horne from the 1960s here in New York City.
Yeah.
And, my dad had phenomenal taste, but I asked him why no baritone voices. And he said to me, because my father, I'm a baritone, and I would like to hear myself sing with these four people. You came to New York, and you mentioned Norman Tragel, and you quickly became part of the company of the New York City Opera. I've had guests on this program before, such as the son of Julius Rudel, the conductor. Yeah, Tony Rudel. I've had many people who in some way connected with City Opera, but I would love for you to talk about the role of the New York City Opera in the opera environment of that time, when in fact they were doing lots of American operas, engaging American singers. You had artists such as Frederica von Stade, Placido Domingo, Jose Carreras, Carol Vaness, many others, and you were in that mix of what became a group of superstars.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I when I was in college, my voice teacher was a man named Arthur Newman, and he was one of the charter members of the old New York City Opera. No, he was with the company from beginning. And he sang mostly smaller roles, but he talked about New York City Opera all the time to me, you know, and talked about Norman Tragel and we used to get a carload of us together during school and drive down to Tulsa. That was the nearest sort of really good opera company. Mm-hmm. And so I went down there and I saw Norman Tragel, you know, a couple of times. And yeah, I think I went to New York. It was always my dream, because of everything I heard from Mr. Newman, to sing at New York City Opera. That was my goal when I first went to New York. And it just seemed to, you know, that City Opera at that time was a very I don't want to say experimental, but they did repertoire that was, I mean, they did the standard repertoire too, you know, but they did things that were out of the ordinary, you know, lots of premieres of pieces, America, like a lot of them, you know, of course, American operas. And it was, I just found it a fantastic place to work, to build my career. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was, I don't want to say that New York City Opera was my young artist program, but it really sort of was, because back in that time, there was not the large amount of not like every opera company had a young artist program. There was Marola in San Francisco, and you know, that's a few other places, but I always said that City Opera was my young artist program.
And the theater entirely from 1964 was what was then called the New York State Theater, which had challenging acoustics. And Beverly Sills told me years ago that she always knew where the sweet spot was, and she stood in that spot, and the productions often would rotate around her, so she always sounded great. And Julius Grudel told me that he would have to really sort of compensate a bit in his conducting to accommodate for that. The reason the acoustics were not great for opera was that George Balanchine, the head of the New York City Ballet, had it built for dance. So it had a different sound on the stage. So you didn't hear the feet landing of the dancers, but also you didn't hear certain voices the way you wanted to. They've improved it somewhat. But would you talk specifically, I'm thinking of Handel, of bel canto opera and so on, hearing Beverly Sills working with Julius Grudel in terms of your formation as a bass who famously does the non-bel canto incredibly well, but also is outstanding in Handel, in Rossini, and things that require different technique. Did you absorb that at City Opera? Did you get that from your teachers?
Well, I got it from, for some reason, I was always able to, shall we say, move my voice. Mm-hmm. You know, my voice always, there was a God-given talent. I don't know, but I always had a facility for coloratura. I mean, I sang a lot of Handel, you know, from the very beginning when I first started singing. I mean, just for fun, you know, but it was just something. And my teacher, in Mr. Newman here at the university, he also had all of his, well, he had me do almost every lesson, you know, a series of flexibility exercises to keep. He says, this will, you know, if you do these exercises every day, you know, it'll keep the voice, it'll keep your voice light and healthy, you know, and this kind of thing is extremely good for your voice. So it was something I always had you know, I don't know what I'm trying to say. I always had the ability for this music, the technical facility. I mean, not perfectly. I had to work very hard at a lot of those roles, but it was something I was thrilled that especially when Rossini became with the Rossini Festival in Pesaro, and everything becoming so popular or
Yeah. Well, actually, since you mentioned the Rossini Festival, it was not on my things to talk to you about, but I'm going to. That was the summer of 1984. And the production was the first modern production of Il Viaggio a Reims by Rossini, which was reconstructed by Alberto Zeta, the maestro. It was conducted by Claudio Abbado. Mm-hmm. You were part of an all-star cast. I worked on that show. I don't know if you remember that. You were Lord Sydney. And I was, because I had been in the 70s, I worked at La Scala. And Abbado asked me to come in and just be present. And I knew Maestro Zeta. So I was at all the rehearsals. And it was because it kind of was like the European Union with Rossini doing a pastiche of each nation. There was Polish, you were British, there were French, there were Russian, there were Italians, of course, Swiss. And talk about what it was like basically to be in an all-star game of singers doing an opera no modern person knew. Well, it was just when they first started. I went to Pesaro the first year I went was in 1982. Mm-hmm. I think it was the second year of the festival. But that year they were tired. Philip Gossett was very much in residence there at the Rossini Foundation, and he and I would talk a lot. And he says, we found it. He came one time to I don't remember for sure which year it was, 82 or 8. I think it was the first year I was there. And he said, I go to this library in Rome all the time to do research. He said, and so I went there, and I was there one day, and he said, this librarian, this woman who worked there, came over and said, we found this somewhere back in the back. He said he plopped. She said he said she plopped this box of material. He went through and it was Viaggio a Reims, all the material. Which they knew existed, but they didn't. Everybody knows the history of it and everything, but nobody had ever seen anything of any of the music. Mm-hmm. And there it was. So they started immediately, constructing it and deciding when they were going to do it, and I had my choice of the roles. So really, why did you Sydney? I don't know. I just Philip, when they got everything sort of put together, Philip, I met with Philip and he sat down at the piano and he played. Now this is the profondo and this, and I don't know, something about it, just that's the role that appealed to me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was, really, the word legendary is overused, but that was a legendary performance and production by all of you. And Katja Ricciarelli, I guess, ostensibly had the lead because she played the woman who's in everybody was stuck at. They were trying to get to rounds for a coronation. But it was brilliant. And then in Vienna, I don't know if you were in the Vienna production, but Montserrat Caballé played that role in Vienna. Yeah. Right. And I did some of the performance. I don't know if I was in Vienna. I was in Vienna. Yeah. So now let's go back to New York City Opera. unfortunately, Norman Tragel died very suddenly in 1975, and he had done a whole gallery of incredible portrayals of bass roles.
Yeah, I saw all of them.
You
well, not all of them, but
yeah.
I never saw him do Blitch, but
okay, well, we're going to talk about Blitch in a bit. You, in effect, inherited those existing productions and roles. Did that unexpectedly change your career in terms of the repertoire you did, as opposed to what you might have been planning to do?
Not really, because when I first came to New York, I went and saw, for instance, I saw the Faust wonderful Faust production they had, and I didn't see Norman do that, but I saw somebody else do it, and but I did see Norman do Mephistopheles several times. And my teacher, Armin Boyajian, and I talked. He said, he says, someday if they ever ask you to do Mephistopheles, you should do it. So I don't know, it was something I always, all that repertoire, Hoffmann, the villains in Hoffmann, those were parts that I wanted to do. The fact that they were Norman Tragel parts was kind of I don't want to say a nightmare, but when I was in rehearsals when I did the revival of Mephistopheles, I think it was in 1977. Anyway, we were doing rehearsals, and I don't know how many times people in the administration would come to rehearsals, and they would undoubtedly say to me at some point, well, it's really good. He said, but you have really big shoes to fill for that in that role.
Yeah.
I finally went into Julius's office one day and said, could you tell the people, the administration, not to tell me that I have big shoes to fill? Believe me, I have known that since we first started talking about me doing this. So anyway, it was kind of a nightmare, but that was repertoire that I wanted to do, So
I want listeners who are not familiar with the geography of New York City to understand that Lincoln Center is on Columbus Avenue, Broadway, Amsterdam Avenue, between 62nd and 65th Street. What was then the New York State Theater, now it's called the Koch Theater, was, if you face the Metropolitan Opera House, the New York Philharmonic was on your right, and the City Opera and the City Ballet were on your left. They all were on the plaza. I worked at the Met, first at the Scala, then at the Met. I began at the Met in 1979. And I knew you from across the plaza, and I knew the work that you were doing. And even though it's just a matter of steps, there was this great divide between the two buildings and the allegiances to the companies. And although I worked at the Met, I never felt that I couldn't cross the plaza and attend fantastic opera at City Opera. But the mentality of many people was you went to one or you went to the other. And you, frankly, in my opinion, they waited too long at the Met to get you to come. And you had big successes all over the big opera houses of Europe. You were a star at City Opera along with Beverly Sills. Carol Vaness didn't come until the same production that you did at the Met. Domingo came earlier, but a lot of von Stade sang little roles in 1970 at the Met, but then went to Europe and then came back to the Met.
Right.
And it was a very strange thing that the greatest singers at City Opera couldn't cross the plaza. They had to go to Europe to then come back. And I will never forget your debut, which was in Handel's Rinaldo in the winter of 1984, because the opera, Rinaldo, was the first Handel done at the Met after 108 years or something like that. No, not quite 100. It was 104 years, something like that. You personally brought down the house, and one of the biggest ovations that I've heard. Marilyn Horne brought down the house. There were acrobats and everything happened in that production. And I think it cracked wide open the concept of what the Metropolitan Opera could do, because the earliest opera they had done was Le Nozze di Figaro from 1786. And suddenly the Met could look backwards. And by extension, the Met had to look forwards into the 20th century and eventually the 21st. Talk about that debut, if you would. I'm sure you've spoken about it before, but I was in the wings and I was dazzled.
Well, that was actually, we did a production. Well, I should say Jackie and I, Marilyn and I, did a production of Rinaldo several years and some years before in Houston. I think it was in 1975. I mean, it was kind of an abridged version. For instance, my aria, I only got to sing the A section, and that was it. So anyway, and it was Frank Corsaro directing. So yeah, when they decided to do that, I remember Marilyn telling me, or my agent, I don't remember who it was. They said, well, there's a production of Handel's Rinaldo coming, and but the Met wants somebody else for the bass part. So I would, but I should have paid Marilyn a commission on this because she put her foot down and insisted that they give it to me. I was already contracted to do it. We did it. We did the production that came to the Met up in Ottawa, Canada, at a festival up there the couple of years before, the summer of '82, I think it was. And Marilyn, I remember Marilyn saying, they're telling me this is a perfect role for you to debut at the Met in. You don't have the show, you don't have the whole show on your shoulders, but you'll make a mark. So it was, I don't know, it was very really.
I've known her, worked with her a lot for decades. She's never been wrong. Anything. And she said to me, we were once talking about a baritone, a very fine baritone, and he was not well known, but she insisted on his working. And she said to me, I know how to pick them. And she's right about herself. Yeah. She does know how to pick them.
Yeah.
And so I was very grateful to her. I knew her by then, that she brought you to the Met, in effect, because the Met was really dragging, and I was one of the people lobbying, saying I had heard you all over Europe at a city opera. And I'm not going to characterize the Met administration of that time, but it was a very grateful thing when you did arrive. The next production I want to talk to you about at the Met, again, I was very involved with, and you did something that told me volumes about Samuel Ramey, the consummate professional that we all know you to be. But that was my first real exposure to it. And here's the story. It was I Puritani at the Met with Joan Sutherland. It was her 25th anniversary. There was a lot of happiness and excitement surrounding her return after a while. And you were playing, I think the character's name was Giorgio. Yeah. And you were seated on the stage right, and you were reading a book. And Sutherland makes her entrance, and the ovation on opening night was so enormous that she froze in place for 2 or 3 minutes. And it felt like, how is this going to break? And I was watching, and you, at a certain point, turned the page on your book. And Sutherland saw that and started laughing. And she said, and I heard it, "Thank you, Sam." And
I must say, I did not remember that.
Yeah, it was thrilling. It was, I mean, to me, as someone who, directed and produced, it was thrilling to see a professional understand the moment. You were in character because could not stare at the same page forever. You did not freeze. You, at the right moment, turned the page, and she broke character and laughed, said, "Thank you, Sam." She curtsied to the audience. She went off stage. Maestro Bonning took up the baton again. She made her entrance and the opera began. And I mean, I tell that story and we document it here because it's something that people forget that I remember incredibly well. I also had another particular experience with that production. Sutherland and Old Bel Canto practically had a mad scene. And you remember the set was a rather old traditional set. And there was a big staircase in the middle, right, where Elvira comes down. But behind was sort of a scrimmer curtain. There was another flight of steps going down. And before the mad scene, we would position a little table there at the bottom where Miss Sutherland would sit. And I would sit with her, and we played cards. We played hearts. And it was my job, number one, to always lose, but number two, to listen to the music so that she could focus on her cards and not on the music and not on what was coming. And at the appropriate moment, I would fold the cards and say, last hand. She'd win again. We'd put the cards down and I would take her hand and we would go up these rather rickety steps. And in that progression up the steps of about 30 seconds, she would transform into character. And at the moment she got to the top, I would switch hands and hold her left hand, and she would turn to face the audience. The light would come on, the jaw would come up, and down she went and sang the mad scene. And that was my job. And people, I did many things backstage where I would, guide a singer here or there or help them. But that was my favorite of all of them. And was that your first time working with Sutherland?
I'm trying to. Other than I think we had done a couple of recordings together before that, but it was it's the only time I did anything on stage with her.
So what was that like? And with Bonnie?
Yeah, right. She's just a delightful lady for, so, I mean, I'm thinking this is Joan Sutherland, La Stupenda, but she was just so down to earth and just nice. She was just so nice and friendly and just a delicious lady.
In listening to her, you obviously, having worked with Marilyn Horne and Sills and so on, you knew bel canto and that the secrets of that technique. Was there something you heard in her or in the conducting with Bonning or his conducting you that furthered your perspective about bel canto singing?
Well, I remember being amazed. I had, because I had done Puritani at City Opera before with Beverly, a few performances with Beverly, and I was just, and then I said, now I'm going to be doing this with Joan Sutherland. But this is really amazing, but I remember thinking that both of these ladies, are just amazing, but in a totally different way. I don't know. I remember thinking about that, having done it with Beverly and now doing it with Sutherland. Well, I couldn't believe I was doing that, for one thing, and but it was just I mean, they were both such amazing artists and singers in a totally different way. I can't. I don't know. I don't know how to explain that, but yeah.
If I were to ask you to explain that in my experience with them, and this is a term I never use because I don't like the term, but I think it's accurate here. They had a very different energy.
Yeah.
Sills was hotter in terms of her energy. Sutherland was very cool and mellow.
Yeah.
And I won't say hotter, there was a feverishness. You could hear it in the voice. You could hear it in the energy as she set foot on the stage. It's as if she was going to scale a mountain, whereas Sutherland was going for a stroll.
Yeah, exactly.
Feeling.
She was scaling the mountain very easily.
Yeah, it was, stepping up the mountain. And it's not that Sills sounded effortful, but Sills would approach it with the energy of the challenge, whereas Sutherland approached it with the energy of confidence. I guess that's how I would phrase it. And, I'm saying this because, all right, which energy of those do you have, or do you have both or neither?
Wow. Well, I don't know. I think I leaned a little bit more to the Sills energy type. That I think I don't know.
Yeah, that would be my guess too. I'm not going to cover every Met role you sang. You sang all the brilliant roles that one would want you to sing, but I'm going to talk about a few highlight moments for me. The next one is negative, not because of you, but you and I have never discussed this particular day. It was January 23rd, 1988. I, by then, was the performance manager. I was running operations in the theater. It was a live broadcast of Verdi's Macbeth, and you played Banquo. And sad to say, after the death of your character, a gentleman committed suicide at the Metropolitan Opera by jumping, falling, whatever term we want, to his death from the family circle down to the orchestra.
Yeah.
I was the responsible person to deal with all that in terms of canceling the performance, dealing with that, dealing with the audience, and so on. I respect people's privacy, so I really will not ever go into much detail about it. But I will talk about what was covered in the newspaper, namely, this gentleman had been a performer in Bulgaria, and he was very well known in Bulgaria, but not well known in the United States. His name was Bancho, was his first name, which is the Bulgarian for Banquo. And he had left a note that after the death of Banquo, your character, he wanted the death of Bancho or Banquo in the theater so that his spirit would permanently remain in the Metropolitan Opera House. And I knew him because he was friendly with Bulgarian artists such as Nikolai Gaudov and Anatomova Sintov. And whenever Bulgarian artists came, he was there. And he had a distinctive cane that he would carry, kind of like one of your villains in Hoffman. And we found the cane. So even before I saw who it was, I knew from the cane who it was. And needless to say, the performance was canceled. Your role was over because your character had died. But it was very traumatic because Peter Allen, the wonderful presenter on the radio, this was a live international broadcast, said that a member of the audience had taken ill because he frankly did not know the full details. And we're not going to announce the full details. It got in the paper after. But it led to thousands of phone calls to the Metropolitan Opera inquiring about one of the 4,000 audience members who maybe that was the took ill. So it was very complicated. Elizabeth Cannell was your Lady Macbeth, and I think it was Fred Burchenal was Macbeth. And the tenor was very upset with me because the Macduff aria doesn't come to the last act, and he said I canceled the performance so that he couldn't sing. And I said, no, it's not. A man unfortunately died in the auditorium by committing suicide. And had he landed on someone else, he would have killed other people too. But I'm wondering now, Sam, because I've never asked you, what did you all know backstage about what was going on?
That's interesting because I was flying that evening to Vienna. I left. I finished as soon as I finished. I got quickly dressed and I left the theater. And I had a flight very short, very soon after. I didn't find out about the gentleman, what happened, until I think the following Monday.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking to my agent in London, and he said, well, and he went on. I said, what? It was bizarre, but I managed to get out of it because they shut the theater, I think, didn't they? But I managed to exit the theater before.
We did a performance that night, because it was a Saturday. So without getting too graphic, I had to evacuate the audience, arrange for refunds, deal with the nerves of the cast and the chorus and the orchestra and the conductor, deal with the person who witnessed what happened, because we had to interview her for the police, and she was great. But
oh my God.
Then we had to remove the remains of this gentleman to the hospital. The police had to do a report. And I said, we need to put up the show for the evening performance and get the word out that the Met will be open for business on Saturday night. And we did. I don't remember what the opera was that night, but we got an evening show on, because frankly, if you cancel a show, you lose money.
Yeah.
So goal, we put on a 1982 on the radio, a 1982 Cheryl Milne's Renata Scotto recording of the production, because we wanted international radio audiences to hear the rest of the opera. And right. Peter Allen announced that because the live performance was canceled, we want you to hear. So the media department was great. We want you to hear a recent Macbeth with Cheryl Milne's and Renata Scotto. So we picked it up from Act 2 on the broadcast, and nothing, the broadcast continued. Nothing went amiss. I had more challenges today with Zoom than we did that day with the international broadcast. So if you were in Vienna, were you not at the performance in February 15th? Maybe you were back. The one Shirley Verrett Lady Macbeth at the Met, it was Justino Diaz and Shirley Verrett. I think you were in it. No? She did one performance only. I had worked on the production.
No, I don't think I was. I don't remember ever singing with Shirley at the Met.
Yeah, that was kind of phenomenal, because she had been in the Streller production. She was the greatest Lady Macbeth I'd ever seen on the stage.
Yeah.
And I don't know who she was brought in to replace, and I don't know why the Met didn't have her to begin with, but she was phenomenal. And it was one of those performances where if you were there, you just remember it. So you then did a quite wonderful production that I was kind of new to the Met, was Bluebeard's Castle, on a double bill with Schoenberg's Zervartung. Jesse Norman was your partner.
Yeah.
How did you learn the Hungarian?
Well, that's well, no, at the Met we did it in English at the Met.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, the production was done in English because Jesse didn't want to learn the Hungarian.
Okay.
I mean, I remember I had not too long after that, I was contracted to do a recording of Bluebeard with Eva Marton, and she put me in touch. She said for the language, she put me in touch with, I can't remember,
Joseph Crane.
He was sort of the head of the ushers.
Joseph Kranus. He worked for me. Joseph Kranus was from Hungary.
Joe Crane. Yes, that was it. Yeah.
In 1956, he walked across the border during the revolution, and wound up in the States and wound up at the Metropolitan Opera. He never lost his thick Hungarian accent. He was, in the best way, a pack rat who recorded everything illegally and had recorded every single Met performance. And I had to stop him from recording because when he reported to me, that was not legal. But he never sold them, but he would give them away. And he was very short. And I remember one time he was teaching Hungarian to Marty Talvela, who was incredibly tall, the bass.
Right.
And Joseph basically sat on Marty's knee and taught Hungarian. But yet, Joe he taught Kiri Takano with the Czardas and Fledermaus in Hungarian. He was sort of our Hungarian teacher.
I remember going to his office at the Met. And we sit there and just speak that text over and over and over.
We mention this because this is in part every opera company, every great opera company, but certainly the Met has all of these figures who ostensibly they're there to be an usher, but they wind up teaching Hungarian to opera stars.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That production was scary to me, and I mean that because it's supposed to be scary. And what memories, if any, do you have of that particular production? Because it was very exciting, especially the fifth door. But everything. There were 7 doors. The fifth door was the one.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's always the fifth door.
Yeah.
No, well, that production. What I remember most about rehearsals and everything, is Jesse and I had these romantic moments, and I just remember thinking she just feels like a giant pillow. But she was really a delightful to work with. That one of the few times I had the fortune to work with her. I think it was maybe the only time I did anything on stage with her. No, well, we did some concerts together. But I remember people saying, because during the course of every time a door opened, I had to remove an article of clothing. And people were wondering if my pants were going to be next when it came to the final door. I said, no, it's going to be my wig.
Soon after, you did a production that not everyone loved, but I really adored, and I defend it when people ask me about it. Zeffirelli's production of Don Giovanni.
Yeah.
That had a superb cast, and it's documented on video, and Carita Matula made her debut as Elvira. Carol Vaness was Anna. The wonderful Jerry Hadley was Ottavio. Ferruccio Furlanetto was Leporello. I think you know that Ferruccio and I are very close friends. And we spoke, he was here in New York, and he asked to send his love to you.
Oh, well, thank you.
He told me many examples, and I'm going to ask you about one, of where you and he would switch roles because you're both basses, and you've done similar repertoire in a lot of cases. And in the Da Ponte version of Don Giovanni, obviously Leporello and Giovanni on the stage briefly switch roles, but during the run of this production, you guys both completely switch roles, and you began Giovanni, went to Leporello, and he began as Leporello and went to Giovanni.
Right.
Talk about, I'm interested in anything you have to say about that production, how Zeffirelli directed. I should say it was very traditional. It was not the most opulent Zeffirelli production. He did it the way he decided it would have been done in 1787 in Prague.
Yeah.
And stagehands moved everything manually. It was not a high-tech production, but to me it was beautifully theatrical. The costumes were old style. And especially Carol Vaness as Anna was frozen in place by her costume, yet was fantastic because she's Carol Vaness, and made so much of her stillness as Anna. Yeah. And they told me, I don't want her to move. I want her to stand there and be Carol Vaness, and she was. Montilla moved a lot more in the more comedic character of Elvira. Talk about building that production.
Well, yeah, Ferruccio and I had done just a few years before, we did the production of Giovanni in Salzburg together. And anyway, we were rehearsing, and when the production was, we were about to go on stage for the first time. And I remember one day we had not ever staged the graveyard scene.
Huh?
And so they set aside, they set aside the day, I think the day before we were going to go on stage for the first time. They scheduled us for a rehearsal in the afternoon, one afternoon, to do the graveyard scene. So Ferruccio and I showed up downstairs, and down in the big rehearsal room downstairs, and we're waiting, and about a half hour late comes Franco into the rehearsal, and he starts talking. He had been to lunch. So he'd had a bit of wine, I think. And anyway, and so he talked, and he talked about the scene. He talked to this, and he did this, that, and he finished talking, and he said, "Okay, see you tomorrow." We never rehearsed it. He talked about it. We never rehearsed it. And Ferruccio and I said, "Well, shall we just do the Salzburg staging?" So that's what we did.
So since you mentioned the Salzburg staging, which I saw, I was dazzled by it. I was not working on it anyway, but I was working in Salzburg that summer and got to see this. I don't want to say greatest. I think that Don Giovanni is the hardest opera to stage, but that was one of the greatest stagings I've ever seen of that opera. And his descent at the end was the best I've ever seen. I believe, and this is just what I don't know for a fact, that Herbert von Karajan, who conducted, had a very strong hand in the stage direction, but I'm not sure if he, quote, did the production. Would you talk about anything from that Salzburg production, which exists on video, and it's magnificent? Everyone should see it.
Yes, he, well, I remember in rehearsal one day, Karajan, I was standing around, and he came over to me. We were rehearsing, doing staging, and he said, I can't remember the film director's name. He had been watching a video of a movie of this. Who did the Hoffman at Covent Garden?
I will look it up and I'll post it on the show page.
It's very famous movie director. But anyway.
Not John Schlesinger.
Yeah, that's right. That's who it was. Yes, Schlesinger. Yeah. Yes, exactly. He said, over the weekend, I was watching such and such a movie of John Schlesinger's. And he was, it's fantastic. And then he went silent he said, "How I wish we had gotten him to do this production." So he did, yes, he did put his oar in a lot of it with the staging.
It was brilliant. And the Festspielhaus is very different because it's a very broad stage.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's not a traditional proscenium like, say, the Met or Covent Garden or Vienna or La Scala. Right. And therefore, the requirements for producing are very different. But it was the rare occasion in my centuries of working in opera that everything worked the way you'd want it to work, and in the hardest opera to stage, and with a great cast, and it was such a thrilling experience that I would want everybody to see that if they could. Um, before we get into Olin Blitz, which we mentioned briefly, you were memorable as the Hoffman villains with a wonderful cast. Carol Vanessa as the women but you had done that before. And it brings me to ask you a question, Sam, that I've always wanted to ask you. It's not a delicate question, but it's just, this is the question I've always wanted to ask Samuel Ramey. You, of every opera singer I've ever known or watched, you have a walk that is unique. You have a walk that it was always Samuel Ramey making his entrance, and it was not necessarily a big, bold walk. You didn't stride in. You kind of tiptoed in. You would creep in, and suddenly you were an apparition, and you were there. Whatever the role was, except maybe Boris Godunov, but every other role, you materialized suddenly. It's as if your footsteps were very quiet, and then there you were. Even in Rinaldo, where you make this big dramatic entrance on a chariot, but then when you got off the chariot, it was delicate. I hope this doesn't sound offensive because it's meant to be a compliment, but your movement on the stage was unlike any opera singer I've ever seen, and it unto itself was thrilling because it connected to your characters. It was not the same walk, but always it was Beverly Sills had some knowledge of walking differently, but you always, your walk, your entrances, your standing, everything was only Samuel Ramey.
Well, I mean, it's nothing that I thought about or planned or anything, but
it was a beautiful thing to watch because it always connected to your characters. I remember specifically in Semiramide, I'm suddenly forgetting the character's name, Asur. That Asur would appear, and wow, because then he would sing this glorious music. Semiramide, on many days of the week, is my favorite opera of all by Rossini. And it's an extraordinary musical piece, and it was done at the Met for the 200th anniversary of Rossini's birth. And you probably know, and if you don't, I'm going to tell you, that everyone backstage nicknamed it Sam Ramey Day.
Yes, I Sammy Ramey Day.
Sammy Ramey Day. But that I saw it just before the pandemic. I was in Venice and they were doing a production, and I saw it there, and it struck me again. The story may not make sense to people, and it's been maligned as a story.
Yeah,
but talk about just the visceral experience of singing that music. Every character in that opera is extraordinary music.
Well, of course, my first my first exposure to it was did a production in Aix-en-Provence, 1980, with Marilyn and Montserrat. So that was my debut in the role. Also, a very interesting production by Pierluigi Pizzi. But musically, it had not been all constructed. Pesaro had not yet done the autographed, the official autographed new version of it. And but I remember I'm talking to when it first came up in discussion, I was talking to Marilyn about it, and she said, "Oh, Sam," she said, "it's all black notes." She said, "You should love it. It's all black notes." But yeah, that's my favorite. That's my favorite Rossini part too. Yeah. And between the production in X and the one we did at the Met, those were both fantastic productions.
The one was John Copley, as I recall,
John Copley, yeah.
brilliant, very long career. We in opera, anyone younger than he and most of us are, including you, call him Uncle John.
Yes, right. I do too. I connect with him on Facebook every now and then.
Yeah.
And I always address him as Uncle John.
Right. One of the really great directors, you mentioned a few now. You mentioned Pizzi, with whom I worked early in my career. Brilliant, very decorative director, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but the visuals in a Pizzi production are very important and very specific, and often quite extravagant. Not in a Zeffirelli way where everything was just huge and gargantuan, but the detail in a Pizzi production are really special. He did the best Lohengrin I had ever seen in Florence many years ago, where he made all the apparitions and all the changes happen magically in a way that the more dramatic productions never do. But John Copley, talk about John, if you would, because I want people to know him. He's a figure we love in opera, but he's not known to the general public.
Yeah, I did. How many things have I done with him? I did Faust with him at Covent Garden. I did Figaro with him in several places, San Francisco and Covent Garden. I've known Uncle John for a long time. He's a great director, but he's very entertaining as well.
He's entertaining, he tells stories, but he also, in my experience, is very good at going up to a singer and saying something to the singer unlocks an emotional or musical moment in the character. And he does that. Some directors sort of say everything to the cast, but Uncle John goes and sometimes gives a note privately to his singer, and you see the effect. And for example, in Semiramide, I remember his working with the chorus and trying to give them ideas about seeing an apparition. I think Asur, your character dies, comes back, something like that. The story is contrived, but how they would respond realistically to this apparition. And I remember the before and the after, and the chorus didn't suddenly rear back in surprise, but the way some of them picked up their heads and responded, it was very beautiful. And that's part of the secrets of his directing style, which I think are wonderful, because yes, the decor is there, but he directs the specificity of character.
Yeah.
Since we're talking about Britain, United Kingdom, Jonathan Miller, you did a production of The Rake's Progress that is coming back to the Met this weekend, for people in New York.
Really? Oh.
Yeah. And a wonderful production, but a little absurd, and I mean that in the best way. But he acknowledges the absurdity of the story. Your character, Nick Shadow, is a wonderfully sly, slightly oily character, somewhere between your Don Basilio in Barbara Seville and your Devils.
Right, exactly.
Talk about Nick Shadow and that character, because in your gallery of, quote, bad guys, he's distinct from the other. Yes,
very. I did Rake's. The first time I did Rake's Progress was at Glyndebourne, what year was it? 1977, I think. Yeah, 1977. Wonderful production. John Cox staged. It's the artist who does the sets and the costumes. David Hockney, costumes and sets. But I remember they had to work me very hard because they really wanted a very pure British accent. So I had hours and hours of coaching to somehow get the British accent in my voice. And but I remember one John Cox had to go away. He had to come to America to Wolf Trap, and he was directing a production of, it was I think a Monteverdi opera. I can't remember which one.
So either Il Ritorno di Ulisse in Patria,
No, it's not Ulysses.
Or Orfeo.
Yeah, I've done it. Maybe it wasn't Monteverdi, maybe it was, but it was some early composer. Yeah. Anyway, and James Bowman, the British countertenor, was performing in the cast. And John Cox went away this week for a weekend just to work to see to put the production up. And he said he came back to us and said, and walked into a rehearsal, and they were badgering me about my English accent or lack thereof. And he said, "Oh, this is funny." He said, I was in Wolf Trap, and I walked into a rehearsal, music rehearsal with James Bowman, and the music person was. I walked in, and the music person was saying to James, "No, James, it's not branches, it's branches." They wanted a very, very American accent. Anyways, but anyway, that production in Glyndebourne was fantastic, but I just love the Rake's Progress. I remember when I was an apprentice in Santa Fe, they did the Rake's Progress, this back in 1966, and I thought, oh wow, I hope I get to do that someday. Mm-hmm. Donald Graham was the Nick Shadow that summer, mm-hmm. and anyway, every time I do, well,
you are famous, justifiably, for your so-called bad guy roles. Right. I mean, obviously, villains in Hoffman, but very famously the devil roles, such as in Faust and Boito's Mephistopheles, but also Berlioz's Damnation de Faust, mm-hmm. and other people too. And years ago, I was having a conversation in front of an audience with Cheryl Mills back when we could do that. And I brought up the fact that 3 of his bad guy roles all get killed, but they all die differently. And Simone Boccanegra is not such a bad guy. He's a mixed guy. And we spoke about the evil is not always evil. And evil has many colorations and shades in it. And much of what I love about your portrayals of, quote, these bad guys, number one, they're likable. But number two, it's not just standard issue evil. And clearly, when in the music, the word, probably both, you've sorted out these characters. And I'd just love to know, let's take Mephistopheles in the Gounod, the Boito, and the Berlioz. How are they the same? How are they different?
Well, I would say that the Boito is there's more of the diabolic character in the Boito. I mean, in Boito, you see supposedly the devil as himself, whereas in Faust, he's really the devil. He's really the sort of the devil in disguise. Mm-hmm. He's always in disguise. You never really see him unless sometimes I do the Walpurgis Night scene in Faust, but not very often. Damnation Damnation is very much on the same order as the Gounod. You never really see the devil as himself. He's always like I said, in disguise as something else.
Now I know, because I've read, I'm sorry to interrupt, that when you did a concert of music of the devil, so to speak, all this wonderful music and portrayals, that there were people who demonstrated that it was evil, and then they were bringing evil to our good theaters and so on. What was that about?
That was out here in Kansas. Years. I had this program that I used to do with orchestras called a Date with the Devil, where I did all the arias from all those devil operas. And here in Kansas, there's this organization up in Topeka called it's a church. Westboro, I think, Westboro, and they are very famous for going around and protesting and demonstrating at they'll demonstrate at anything where there might be gay people.
Yeah,
they're very much demonstrating against gay people, and the worst thing is that they'll be standing there and they'll have little toddler kids with them. They bring their kids, and these kids are holding these disgusting signs. And see, when I did this program, Date with the Devil, up at Kansas University in Lawrence, they turned surprisingly they turned up at my concert and were demonstrating outside, as you entered the theater.
As it happens, the leader of that church was named Fred Phelps, and the reason I know this, my name is Fred Plotkin. And when I would do searches on my name, he was more famous than I am. The first thing that would come up would be Fred Phelps, and I would have to correct Fred Plotkin. That's why I know more about that church than I ever should.
Yeah.
But okay. I remember there was a theater in the United States where they posted, you were not in this production, they were doing a production of Faust, and they posted a warning sign about the content, that it may prove offensive to people, certain people, and that they wanted people to be fairly warned before they would purchase a ticket.
Right.
If we're not supposed to talk about sex, politics, and religion, there's no opera.
Exactly.
And seriously, what I love about opera, among many things, apart from the glorious music and the colleagues, is that it does talk about who we are as people, with all of our complexities and contradictions. And it's a giant mirror that reflects who we are. And so, which brings me, frankly, to the opera by Carlisle Floyd, Susanna, based on the biblical story of Susanna and the elders, which you memorably played Olin Blitch, who was not a devil character, but he was, let's call him, judgmental. And and what I loved in your portrayal was that I've seen other men play it. You could have made him just Fred Phelps. You could have made him raging and crazy. You didn't. He was very low key, but we understood everything about his malevolence. How did you arrive at your choices when you created the character of Olin Blitch?
Well, I was fortunate in the first time I did the part. This is a role for one thing that I had been dreaming of doing for ever since I was in college. I go back to my teacher, Arthur Newman, here at the university. He was in the original cast at City Center when the production premiered. And so he talked about that. He said, you have to think about that part one day. I think one day that'll be a great role for you. So I remember riding off to Padelson's music store in New York and getting a score of it, which I still use, and I've had it since the early 1960s. And But what was I got off on a tangent now? I was
at Olin Blitch and how you, I would say,
Oh, yeah.
underplayed. Yeah.
So I was contracted to do it for the first time at the San Diego Opera back in, I think it was in 1980, somewhere around there. And but fortunately, the director of the production was Carlisle Floyd.
The composer.
Yes, he came and directed the production. So we talked about it a lot, and he talked about Norman a lot, of course. But he said, "But you have to find your way of doing it. You have to find your way of doing this." He said, "Did you ever see Norman do it?" I said, "No, I never saw him do it, except for a little video of the church scene." And he said, "Well, he said his interpretation of it is, very bizarre."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "But you have to find your own way of your own interpretation, your own way of doing it." So I mean, it's something that I probably my first performances were not very good, although it had a delightful cast. Richard Castley was Sam, and Patricia Craig was Susanna. But I think over the course of years of my experience with it, I did it at City Opera, some run of City Opera, and I did it elsewhere. So I think I came up with my own interpretation.
It's memorable. It's one of those. I mean, I've seen, I think, every Samuel Ramey role. It's way up there at the top. Well, they all are, but that one in a particular way, because it was so underplayed, but therefore so much more chilling. He was subversive. He was scary. He was as scary as the devils, but didn't have the charisma. Let's say, yeah, an evil charisma.
Yeah,
and it really, really worked. But you're a very nice man, and you're known by everyone in our profession to be a very nice man. Where are you able to pull those other characteristics out to play these characters so incredibly persuasively?
I don't know where that comes from. I've always said that myself. I'm really a very nice guy. I said, I'm not the person that I portray on stage quite a bit of during my career. But I remember years ago, City Opera had already talked to me about doing a revival of Mephistopheles. So that was set. So my agent found me an opportunity to do Mephistopheles elsewhere, just to get a chance to do it before doing it at City Opera. So the year before, I got a chance to do it at Bob Jones University
in South Carolina.
Yes. Talk about a scary place. But
focus place.
Anyway, they have a fantastic performance school. They do fabulous things. And so one day they said, we're showing a movie that we produced here. If you'd like to come and see it. And sure. So we went, and it was all about I don't remember the name of it, but it was all about the Spanish Inquisition. And who played the Grand Inquisitor in the movie? Bob Jones. Reverend Bob Jones. And so after we saw that, we had lunch one day at the school, and we always had the cast was Nancy Shade. Do you remember her? Nancy Shade,
Sure.
Who's the tenor? He's a Puerto Rican tenor, I think. Can't think of it.
Not Casanova.
No.
Francisco Casanova? No. Okay.
No, it's somebody previous, he sang at City Opera a bit, but
that's all right.
The name's right here. Anyway, so they always invited the cast to go to lunch to the dining room at the university. We sat there with Dr. Bob and had lunch. So I said to Dr. Bob, I said, "Oh, we saw the movie about the Inquisition movie," and I said, "You were fantastic." And he said, "Oh, yes." He says, "I enjoyed that very much." He says, the bad guys always have more fun.
So speaking of that Inquisition, let's go to Don Carlo. You handed me that one. Yeah. You, like Ferruccio, have wonderfully played both the Inquisitor and King Philip II. I remember a really fantastic performance you did in Milan of Philip. You have been literally everywhere. Yeah, I have. Well, basically, somehow where you're singing, I managed to get to. I didn't get to San Diego. I didn't get to Bob Jones University, but otherwise, I first heard you in the 70s, and when my schedule permitted. And then, frankly, you were singing for many years in the theater I worked at. So that was easy. I went to the wings and I went to rehearsals and so on. But your Don Carlo King Philip and your Don Carlo Inquisitor, they have a scene together. And just as we were talking before about Giovanni and Leporello, these two characters, and they're very different men.
Yeah.
And in my view, the Inquisitor has more power, even though the other one is the king. And how do you transition in the two when you know the motivations of the other guy, so to speak, when you're playing that scene?
As when I'm doing what?
Well, let's say you're doing the king, and you also know, because you've played the Inquisitor, what's going on. How do you separate your knowledge of the Inquisitor and just play the king? Because I think one could almost anticipate, if you know the roles so well. I mean, I know the roles, and I'm not a singer. And I mean, I've seen you and I've seen Ferruccio do both beautifully. But I guess what I'm asking is, I'm not saying that you need to do something different, but you did them very well. And what happens in the act of creating one on the stage as opposed to the other when you know both intimately?
Oh, wow, that's a very interesting question. I don't know whether I've ever thought of that or not.
All right.
I mean, I know I'm not, when I'm about to do one or the other, I don't think, well, tonight I'm Philip, I have to do this. I think those things that those sort of things sort of come automatically. I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, they are such different characters. They're both, huge, powerful, but in very different ways, because one of them is asking the king to execute his son.
Yeah.
And horrendous things. And he says, you run half the world, but you can't manage your own family. It's just the most devastating scene in one of the greatest operas ever written, and central to everything. Even though the opera is called Don Carlo, I think a strong case could be made that it's really Philip and Elizabeth who are the story.
Yeah.
And the Inquisitor has this role in the whole thing.
I remember talking about the role of Don Carlo years ago. I was studying way back, summer of 1974. I went to Rome to study with Luigi Ricci,
Mm-hmm.
and I was there, and so while I was there, the Rome Opera was doing Don Carlo, and so I get this with Siepi, and so I got a ticket and I went to it, and lo and behold, who shows up at the same night? But you remember Harry Thayard?
Sure.
Harry Thayard and his wife come walking into the theater, and there they are. So anyway, I found them after the performance. That's when he was doing Manon Lescaut at did that production with, I think that was with Nancy Shade as well,
Mm-hmm.
with Manon Lescaut and Minotti's place
In Spoleto.
in Spoleto. Yeah. Anyway, he was doing that, and he came up to see this production. And we met each other after the show, and we have to go backstage and see Siepi. We have to go see Siepi. And we're walking back, and Harry says, in his own, the way he talked, he said, man, he says, the title part, the part is part of Don Carlo, the tenor part. Said, I don't think I'd ever want to do that part. He says, he's nothing but a blocking back for the baritone and the bass.
And it's true.
It's true.
Greatest act in the opera, he's not in. They're talking about him, but he's not there.
Yeah.
He only has a duet and a little bit of a solo, and then the great tenor baritone duet. It's a thankless role.
Yeah.
It's high, it's hard to sing, it's long, and he's upset the whole time. But the other characters are the ones who have the character arc, and not Carlo himself. I want to ask you a few more things. And one of them is, you memorably did some Russian roles. Boris being a great one. If you want to talk about Boris, please do. And then we're going to talk about War and Peace. How did you build your Boris? What was the attraction? Who did you listen to and study to create your Boris?
Oh, wow. I remember I did it. Let's see. I did Boris for the first time I did it was in Geneva. And we did the original version, not the one with no Chromie forest, no Polish scene. It was just short. I mean, you could do it without an interval.
Yeah.
Anyway, who did I listen? I listened to. Well, I remember listening to Pinza do it. I remember listening to Giaurov. I was always afraid of listening to Giaurov, though, because he has such a humongous voice, and I said, I don't want to find myself trying to make that kind of sound. I don't. But I don't know, and also that was my first time. Well, not the first time that I had performed in Russian, but the first time I had done a role on stage in Russian was Boris,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a nightmare for the language, and just I don't know. I still have nightmares about that. But I don't know. And then I was thrilled that the Met asked me to do it, and I don't know. It was. I was always a little bit afraid of it. I remember my teacher Armin and I would talked about it a few times. He said, you have to be careful, I think, with Boris, not to do it too early, because I had been offered it before, and I decided not to do it. He said, because I've heard singers in the past do Boris for the first time, and sometimes that singer is not quite the same after he's done Boris. He said, I don't know, So I was always a little nervous about it. I just decided that I would wait until I was at least 50 before I would do it for the first time, which I did.
Mm-hmm. Then later on in 2002, you were part of the Met premiere of Prokofiev's War and Peace. Yeah. It was a massive production, co-produced with the Mariinsky in St. Petersburg. It had the debut of Anna Netrebko as Natasha. It had the wonderful Dmitry Vorostovsky. Yeah. It had one of my favorite artists who we'd not seen at the Met for a while, Elena Obraztsova, who was one of the sexiest women I've ever come across. You don't have to comment on that, but she just, in her sexy roles, but also just as a person, there was an aura about her that was just incredible, and you could feel the energy field around her being very, very charged. And she was quite something, and she knew it, and she didn't work that, but she knew that certain people, men particularly, would just sort of be astonished in her presence by whatever that was. And you didn't have the biggest role in the opera, but it was absolutely show-stopping. And I don't know if the character is pronounced Kutuzov. And you had an eye patch. You got to do an eye patch role, Eboli, and a couple of the others, and Botox. And talk about that, because in the middle of these cast of thousands, and even on the opening night, someone fell into the orchestra pit or jumped, who knows? But I remember that very well, because during the curtain calls, Joe Volpe, the general manager, got on stage and said the man was unhurt, but we never saw that person again. But it was just a stunning night. Gergiev directed. Anything you want to talk about, but especially, I mean, audiences know Samuel Ramey, and certainly by 2002 knew you very, very well. But there was just something dazzling about that particular role. Talk about it.
I don't know how much I can talk about it. I learned it, very quickly, and probably forgot it just as quickly. No, but I remember that it was amongst a lot of I don't want to say noise. It was a very singable, very beautiful vocal lines. And, it's like I don't know. It's like he stuck something foreign into the middle of it. Because it was the role is so different from anything else.
It reminded me little in terms. I mean, it had that Samuel Ramey walk that I spoke of, but he was an older man.
Yeah,
and therefore it was just different from everything else, and that's all I can say about it. But it was one of those moments when you in the audience, the breath is caught, and the focus becomes entirely just on your character on the stage. And I don't know if it was videoed. I hope it was in some form.
I don't know.
I don't know either. So there are a couple of more things I want to ask you about. And obviously, if you have a question for me, feel free to ask. I think you know that Luciano Pavarotti and I were very, very close friends for 29 years. And we knew each other in Italy, and he was in Don Carlo with you, and Muti conducted. Actually, before we get to Luciano, Riccardo Muti, you've worked with a lot. He clearly found inspiration in you and I would imagine you and him. He famously conducts the way he thinks Verdi or whoever the composer was would have wanted. Yeah. You sing in your very charismatic, famous, musical, beautiful style. Was there a meeting of the minds with you and Muti on the roles, or you also were in fact in the very late production at the Met of Attila, not as Attila. You did Attila with Muti Milan, but in a smaller role at the Met. Talk about him and Verdi and you.
I have a funny story. I was singing in Aix-en-Provence. I was doing that Samuel Ramey production in Aix-en-Provence, and they started discussing. My agent was discussing that La Scala was going to do a new production of Figaro, and they were asking about my availability and everything. And he said, "But you'll have to go. You'll have to go audition for Muti." And I said, "I can do that." So anyway, one day I flew from Aix to Rome, and I was to go to the Rai building in Rome, and there I would do this audition. And so I arrive at the building, and I'm sitting outside waiting, and finally I see some sort of a fuss, somebody coming in and saying, "Oh, hello, Maestro, how are you?" And I am Maestro, blah, blah, Maestro this. And I'm looking, and I didn't see anybody that looked like Muti. So, but then I was called into this room, and it was this short little heavy-set fellow man, an older man, and obviously an assistant. Well, it turned out it was Franco Siciliani, the old intendant. I didn't know who. I mean, I didn't know of him.
Yeah,
I knew. So anyway, the three of us were in this room waiting to go into. And he said, "Why don't you?" I said, "Do you have?" He said, "Do you have your music?" And I said, "Yeah." I gave him my bass anthology, and he thumbed through it. And he said, "Oh," he said, "Sing this." So I sat there and in this room with Siciliani playing for me. I sang like 4 or 5 arias. And he said, "But well, we still want to hear you in the theater." So I went back to Aix, and I was talking to Marilyn about my trip to Rome, and I said, "Well, it wasn't Muti I sang for. It was Franco She said Siciliani, and I said, "Yeah." She said, "He's the intendant. He brought Callas to Scala. He's that's Siciliani." Anyway, so anyway, I never had to audition for Muti. And but Muti, we developed. I did Figaro with him for 2 years in a row at La Scala, and then I did some concerts with him here and there, Verdi requiems, and then the Don Carlo came, and I mean, I knew that Maestro Muti was, did not like interpolated things. So anyway, the scene. We were rehearsing one day for the scene in the Sala Gialla at the music rehearsals, and all sitting around table and rehearsing the scene with the Grand Inquisitor and doing the duet, and came to that part where he says that he wants Il Signor di Posa, and then Philip, spoke, "No, jamais!" So that's what I did. I went, "No, jamais!" And Muti, I thought he was going to have a heart attack. And I knew that would be I did it on purpose. I knew that would be the reaction. He said, no, 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 Sam, what are you doing? You have to sing it, maybe a little more dramatic, but I need to hear the notes.
Now I want to talk to you about Luciano. He was to retire from the Met singing in Tosca a couple of years before 2004, but he genuinely was ill. I want to put this out on public record because I was with him and I was making him chicken soup. I know he was sick. It's the New York Post cruelly put a headline, "The Fat Man Won't Sing." It was terrible. And he felt very bad about that. And he was nervous at his, what was an older age, coming back to do 3 performances of Tosca in March of 2004. Carol Vaness was Tosca. You were Scarpia. And Luciano, who by then vocally was great, but was very fragile on his knees. He had had a lot of orthopedic injuries. And I remember they filled many bags with lentils. So for the execution, when his character is shot, he sort of fell back onto these lentils and he was sort of standing up, but it cushioned his fall. He was very apprehensive. And he said to me, "I'm doing this because I have Carol and I have Sam." And he said, and obviously James Levine, and I know that I can get through it because they were there. I had Carol Vaness on my program about a year ago, and we discussed this, and she reminded me of something I forgot, that in the second performance, she got sick. She had a stomach ache of some kind, and it relates, she'd tell the story, to something that Luciano fed her. And she was so nervous about getting sick on the stage doing Tosca that Cynthia Lawrence was brought in for the third act because she barely got through the big dramatic scene with Scarf in the second act. I don't know if you knew that she was nauseated at the time from food, or she didn't tell you.
I don't think I did.
And then the farewell was March 13th of 2004. Talk, if you would, about those 3 performances with Luciano, with Carol Vaness and James Levine.
Well, I mean, I was just, I felt really honored to be doing those performances with his Luciano's last performances. I kept asking myself, well, what are you doing here doing this? I said, and but it was just a huge thrill for me to, well, it was always working with Luciano was always just a great, wonderful pleasure, beautiful. And he was always so nice to me. He was always so nice to me. I always remember that. Yeah.
And
memorable
at the end, despite all of his, medical issues and so on, the technique, I mean, the voice was beautiful, but he sang well to the very last.
Yeah.
Which I found extraordinary because many singers don't necessarily, especially tenors and certain sopranos. And yet he really had that rock solid technique. And he was, the stereotype about him was he was not bright. That's completely wrong. He was very intelligent and wise about the use of his voice, and he seldom betrayed his assets. Leontine Price, the same, that she never violated what she called her reserves, her foundation. And so she had a very long career as well. You are about to go into a production of Tosca pretty soon in a new role. Would you talk about that?
Yeah, every once in a while, somebody will throw me a bone, and ask me to come and perform. A couple of years ago, I went to Dallas and did Benoit and Alcindoro. This just came up recently. That Houston Grand Opera was going to do a Tosca production next year, and they asked me to come and do the sacristan. So, and it's something I've thought about, that I'd like to do, so I'm really thrilled that I'm going to have the chance.
So let me ask, since you're preparing the role, that character can be overdone with a lot of stage business.
Yeah,
You,
I know.
Lord, right now, don't do that. You tend to find the essential in characters. I mean, he really can fuss about and all the stuff of going through the donation boxes and finding them empty and opening the basket and where's the food and all that. I've seen certain predecessors of yours, Italo Tayo, for example, really do a lot of prosciutto in the scenes. Have you thought about the interpretation, or you're waiting until you get into rehearsal?
Yeah, I'm not gonna think about it. I thought I should watch some videos, and just see what. I don't know though. I don't know whether I'll do that or I just wait to go to rehearsals. I don't know.
I have been to most of the great opera houses of the world. I've not been to Sydney. I was supposed to work there in the fall of 2001, but that was 9/11 in New York, and it's the only time I canceled an engagement. I have not been to Glyndebourne, though I've worked for them, but I've never been in Glyndebourne. I have been to the Bolshoi in Moscow, but only for ballet night opera. And I've never been to the Houston Grand Opera.
Oh.
Which is a great company. I know it's a great company, and I know all the people have come out of there and wonderful artists and new commissions, and I haven't avoided it. It just didn't happen in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And so as a Samuel Ramey completist, I think I'm coming to Houston.
Well, I would appreciate that.
Sure. Never mind who's singing Tosca and Scarpia Cappadocia. I'm coming for you. I want to conclude, number one, with my gratitude. But number two, I made a point of being at the Metropolitan Opera House on April 24th of 2009. It was your 25th anniversary. And the Met, and this is not a criticism, accords a special celebration of anniversaries only to very few artists, which makes that recognition more special when it happened. A few days before, they did that for Morella Freni and Alfredo Kraus in a gala, and you sang as part of that gala. But then they honored you. It was a production of Don Giovanni, and a production I like very much, by the way, the Martha Keller production, which the scenery was just sort of not much. But the stage direction was so incisive, and she so knowledgeably, as a woman, directed the men, you, Peter Mattei, all the others, the women in the cast, in such a way that all the sexual and the interpersonal dynamics made so much more sense to me, even than the Karajan production we spoke about in Salzburg. In terms of rationality about the characters, that to me was the gold standard. And at the end of Act One, the entire cast assembled on the stage, and the general manager at the time, now Peter Gelb, presented you with a score from Don Giovanni from around 1824, and it was in a box covered with that also contained a piece of the Met curtain from the opening of the Olympics in 1966. And the score was inscribed, "For Samuel Ramey in celebration of the 25th anniversary of your Metropolitan Opera debut, January 19th, 1984, with admiration and friendship from your colleagues at the Metropolitan Opera, April 24th, 2009. And I think that that speaks to something about you, but also about the Met, about opera in general, the concept of colleagues. And we've spoken a lot today about things being shared, how you've learned from older people, how you've passed down to younger people. I know that you are a much admired teacher. You've had great teachers yourself. Talk about that day, but then talk about how do you teach and pass down what we know? It's not that easy.
Well, I mean, I've retired from the university here now, but
okay.
I wasn't hired to be a voice teacher because I don't have the letters after my name, to be a voice teacher.
You are RAMEY, that's enough.
a 50-year, almost 50-year singing career does not, match up to a master's degree or a doctor or whatever. Anyway, I won't get into that. So I was here mainly. I was here primarily as just a coach. I worked mostly with graduate students, and I was not allowed to speak to them vocally. But once in a while I did, but not very often. So what I ended up doing is helping them mostly with languages. So anyway, that was really the sum of my teaching here at Wichita State.
But talk then about your 25th anniversary that day, because it was very moving. I was so happy I was there to witness that in the audience.
I was very pleased that they did it. I mean, I don't know if they do they still do it for every, they don't do it for every.
Not very, I mean, I'll be blunt about this. The recognition of you was much more notable and better than the one they did for Marilyn Horne, who certainly deserves recognition. Theirs was it was when she was doing the role of Geneviève in Pelléas and Mélisande, and it didn't have the same warm feeling that the one they did for you. And, and yes, Alfredo Kraus, Marilla Franey, absolutely, and Domingo and Pavarotti and people, and you. But many artists who I think really deserve recognition. They did honor Paul Pliska for the length of his career. During the Toscas you did with Luciano, they honored Charles Anthony, who was a character tenor, who had, I think, the most or the second most number of performances by any performer in Met history. And I'm glad Luciano loved Charles Anthony. I don't know if you know that Charles Anthony was New Orleans and his real name was Charles Anthony Caruso.
Yeah, I knew that. I knew that.
Being said, we have to change your name if you will sing at the Metropolitan Opera. But no, it was special because it was genuine. We felt it. We felt it in the audience, and it was felt very much on the stage.
Oh, I certainly felt
the sense of colleagues and collegiality of making things work. I was a student with Giorgio Strehler, and his key was always how to make things work when there's a challenge. Like today in our little way, the Zoom went crazy, and I'm speaking to you on my phone where I rather would have done it on better technology, but we made it work.
Yeah.
And, that's Zeffirelli was the same way, that way of how to make things work and how to untangle problems. And a lot of it is about who your colleagues are. And that is part of the lesson. When I was just beginning Marella Franey, I was 22 and I was working on a production at La Scala of Simone Boccanegra. She called me to her dressing room and she said to me in Italian, I want to teach you a word that you will carry with you throughout your career. Collega, colleague. She said, you are my collega, I am your collega. This was Marella Franey. And she said, if we work together that way, it will all work out. And I remember that so well because it did. And she was right.
Yeah.
And the few people in our business who pull attitude and are impossible are known for being impossible and not good colleagues. But the stereotype of opera people being difficult, I think, is really wrong. I find opera people to be very flexible and collegial and willing to make things happen.
Yeah.
And you are that in addition to everything else. And Sam, all I can really say is thank you. You know that I esteem you. I don't say that to people unless I really mean it. Now that we've spoken, I can go after Jane Fonda.
I'll put in a good word for you.
Please do. Please do. And Sam, thank you so much. I'm going to try to make it happen to come to Houston because I really would love to see you in the next role.
Oh, that would be thrilling. Thank you very much. Well, Fred, thank you so much for asking me to do this. It's been a delight for me, and I really, really appreciate it.
I appreciate it too. Thank you so much, Sam. Be
Thank
well.
you.